So if you're somebody who wants to spend your life choosing to polish the rocks that people have thrown at you, right? Like we all do this. Look at this one. This is what happened to me when it's so tempting.
Absolutely.
I'm so good at it too.
My guest in this episode is a professional jazz pianist who divides his time between performing, composing, and education work. He is the son of a South African exile and an English aristocrat, whose marriage and the press attention it received led to the South African government of 1968 to declare them prohibited immigrants in South Africa, meaning it was illegal for his parents to visit South Africa as a married couple with their children. He says, "Their experience has influenced my values, my politics, and my passion. I use music as a tool to tackle inequality, challenge prejudice, and to create the confidence to carry out these tasks." Pete Letanka, welcome to Unlived Lives.
Thank you.
So good to have you on the show. Thank you so much for coming. Why do you have the ambitions you have?
Well, I think ambition, I feel, is like it's like the water in the ice tray, that you will have it in one bit of your life and you want it in another bit, and it exponentially grows. So I never feel like I'm particularly ambitious to sort of make money. I never feel I'm particularly ambitious to get my name in more areas. But I think that I love the idea of, as I say, trying to balance up equality. That's my real, that infuses everything. But if I can do that with a trio, or I can do it with a quartet, or I can do it with a quintet, then I can do it with a small ensemble, I can do it with an orchestra, I can do it with, and that growth of vision and scale and ambition I find really exciting, just because it's a bigger train set to play with. But my ambition, I think, the route through all of it is just trying to recontextualize the way I think and use music to not just serve an audience, but actually to have a greater reach in society.
Why did you choose music to do that?
I started playing at 5. It was something I'd always done. I can't remember not being able to play the piano. It's like that thing of walking. I can't remember how I couldn't walk. It's sort of. So when I sit at a piano, I feel it's my safest, easiest place. So I think that it wasn't so much I knew from the start that was my route. As I say, it really was recontextualizing. I had, it was something that had no agenda as a kid. It was just something I did. And then as I went through and was performing after music college and just playing and gaining experience, and it was by complete chance that meeting the two people who set up a company called Children's Music Workshop that brought in musicians and really guided them to rethink the way they think about music, of sending them into schools in the kind of lowest income areas of London, and the children who were about to be written off by society, and being able to say, rather than just go in there and play music at them, why didn't you go there and see if they can play music with you, and also see if they can create music to perform with you. And that was just one of those happenstance, right place, right time, complete luck. And having somebody who had that vision of using musicians for that as that tool. So it wasn't really me. I was very much guided to recontextualize the way I think about music.
Amazing. And that was that moment that you sort of saw the power of music to do that.
Yeah, and I was so cynical about it. You know, I've got two older sisters who I spent my life them taking the piss out of everything I do. So I'm not earnest. But it makes me earnest, and it's really weird because I went in. You know, as I say, I've always kind of mocked and just found, just taking the piss out of that sort of earnest kind of behaviour. And suddenly I see it transform people's lives. I go into a youth offenders institute and I see them standing like this. They can't even make eye contact. They're so knotted. And then we spend a week and their ideas are suddenly being presented. And I always bring in a really nice rhythm section. So whatever they do is got a platform already. So they're kind of they're already off the ground. And then, but it's their ideas it's their ideas that are driving everything. And then for them to perform it to their peers and to the people in the prisons, they walk out a foot taller. And I can't not see that. I can't unsee that. I can't pretend it's not there or let my natural cynicism say, I can't take the piss out of that one.
Sure.
Because that is absolutely real. And that's why I think that while we have these huge rates of reoffending and the money that is being ploughed into this incarceration system, and the kind of unanswered question is whether it's rehabilitation, whether it's punishment. All of those things that aren't really clear or vary from prison institute to institute.
It's that question of, does law work?
Right.
Because if law worked, nobody would be in jail.
Yes.
It's a patch.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. And I think if you can walk out and say, and just remember that moment of having your idea presented and it being really just being valued is what allows you to move into an interview room and say to the person, I can do this job. And that's half, I think more and more people doing that, you've halved reoffending rates.
Who valued your opinion as a kid? So where did you learn that from? Yourself, to allow you to have your opinions?
Do you know what? I think I used to go, my parents used to take me on drives. So weird. Every night, most nights of a week when I was like from 8, 9, 10, I suppose. And it was really weird. We used to just drive around the back lanes of Luton. My dad used to take me to sort of Luton Airport, which was a small little airport. It's like a sort of cottage airport. So you could drive right up to the runway. They had a kind of tiny little cafe that would serve Nescafe and wagon wheels and stale sandwiches. And you could just go and sit there and look at the planes take off and land. And we used to do this all the time. I was obsessed with aviation as a kid. And those moments as we drive to those bits, it was all going around the back end of Luton Airport, we just used to talk. So we talk all the time with my dad, and then my mum would do the same things. So weird. I haven't even thought about this for so long. We would just drive, and we would talk and talk and talk. I don't know what about. But also, I think that was, I think I was I realised that I could solve all, not problems because that sounds too big, but just like anything that I was worried about, anxiety, all of those things that I could untangle the knots by talking. And I think those drives with my parents, and again, the perfect thing of being in a car, because you're sitting opposite, you're not looking at each other, it's not intense, you're just sort of sitting, you're distracted, and then so everything comes out. And I think the power of, I realised the power of being able to talk is profound. Yeah.
Who has offered you the most useful career advice?
The most useful career advice. Well, I think so. I lived in America. I won a scholarship to spend a year in America. I had this amazing piano teacher who, he's amazing. He's kind of, I think he'd won the Thelonious Monk Jazz Piano Award. Anyway, it's like the Nobel Peace Prize of the jazz world. So he was extraordinary. And so he would have always taught me some fascinating things. I also think possibly like a catalyst where you need the perfect temperature, pressure, all conditions for it to work. I was, 19, 20. I was far from home. I was in a place where everything he said really landed. And as I say, he is such a brilliant man. It would have landed anyway, but I think I was incredibly open to it. And he would have, when I was studying jazz in England, it was like maths. It was like sort of equations. Play this scale over these chords. This is your chord scale relationships. It was just number crunching. And when I would go to him and say, what scale should I play over these chords? He'd say, what are you talking about? This is not number crunching. This is not maths. This is music, right? You've got to get there. You're so concentrated on the science of it, you've forgotten the soul of it. This stuff is dance music. What you should be looking at is to see whether people's feet are tapping while you're playing. And if you're not, you're dead in the water. It's game over. Who cares? Play one note, but make sure it swings. Make sure it moves people. Otherwise, it's pointless. And that balance of getting the science and the soul was brilliant. And because it was probably based on the science that I'd been taught in England, to suddenly have this thing, it's not like saying to a painter, just use your inspiration and just paint. They need to be able to draw hands or understand the balance of shade and light or whatever the technique.
I was going to say, do you think it would work the other way around?
Well, I don't know whether it necessarily matters what comes first, but I think you just need both. So that was brilliant. And part of that sort of approach was that when I'd make a mistake, because I think from that point I'd been very binary, I'd had a very classical training, and I felt my choices were, I can play this right or wrong. That was my real binary thing.
Sure.
And so when I would make a mistake, my training had just said, I've done it. And he would say, sort of in a lesson, are you still thinking about the mistake you made like 5 minutes ago? And he's saying, yeah. And he's saying, because everything you're playing rubbishly now. You've got to, it's gone. It's gone. He's like, that mistake was the least interesting thing you're going to do today. Do something interesting. I don't care about that stuff. Make my toe tap. That's more interesting than me sitting here watching you polish your mistakes.
It's that thing of you can ingest all of the information, all of the technical information that you have that you need to learn about the thing that you want to do, and then you've just got to let it come out of you, rather than thinking, oh, no, I've got to do it in this exact way.
Yeah.
So it goes through you, and then it becomes you.
Yeah.
Rather than you just regurgitating the information.
Exactly. And that career advice, that sort of point, has informed every part of my life. And it's, as I say, it's not about me wanting to make... It's not that I'm careless about mistakes or don't care about being clumsy. Of course, you're conscientious. You want to do the best you can. But I can't be dominated anymore by feeling like my mistakes are going to haunt me for too long. I learn from them, but I'm not carrying them in my pocket. No way.
And you bring that into your teaching?
In everything I do. It's in everything. And that's why that guy was so key, because it wasn't music he was teaching me. He was teaching me a way of living.
What makes you most stressed?
What makes me most stressed, I would say, is trying to get what I want to do in the time I've got. Feeling like I'm not using my time well. I think that's the hard thing, is always... so that my thing of dividing my career between these three bits of being a performing musician, composing, and education work, I used to feel like it was plate spinning. So I used to feel I was constantly moving between being the jack of all trades, and I always wanted to be the jack of all trades but the master of them all. And that required me to constantly move between the spinning plates to keep them up, and that I found really stressful. What I'm better at doing now, I think I realised, is that they're not going with the plate analogy, I'm not quite sure, but they're not three
individual
sticks,
plates,
right?
yeah.
It's I don't know, I can't work out how...
It's one plate with different segments.
Right.
Or something.
Right.
They all connect.
They all, absolutely, and so it's not... And I think that shift in my head about thinking about my career and my approach to music really changed everything.
When was that shift?
5 years ago.
Wow.
Quite recently, in that I've been doing this for, 25 years or something. And I guess 5 years ago, this suddenly and I think my stress was much worse then. And so my stress now is just making sure that I remember that this is all part of it, and
coming back to that idea.
Yeah. So Benjamin Brisson, he got an award that was presented to him in Aspen in 1974, and when he accepted it, he talked about the three elements of musicianship, and he said what you need for music to happen is you need a composer, you need a performer, and you need an audience. Now, I misheard that and I misunderstood what he was saying, because I thought he'd said to be a musician, you need to be part composer, part performer, part audience. It's only since going back to the speech and thinking, oh my gosh, I've been misquoting him for years to myself and to others. But what I think my mistake has actually really helped me, right? There's, apparently Albert Einstein said, well, how did you discover the law of relativity? And he said, I ignored an axiom. He'd made a mistake. That's how he discovered this thing that changed the world. And for me, it was exactly the same. This mistake that made me suddenly realize that it's not separate. It's all, just as we're saying, it's all part of the same thing. And it's all this trinity of, geometry is not my strength, but to be a rounded person, you need to have this you need to have this trinity within the circle, right?
Or indeed a content person.
To be a content person. Yeah. But to have all those bits of music being, in one. That has been really useful to discover.
And the sharing of that knowledge to children and sort of adults and beyond is part of that.
Absolutely. And I hope, like me, that they spill it into those other parts. So if you're somebody who wants to spend your life choosing to polish the rocks that people have thrown at you, right? Like we all do this. Look at this one. This is what happened to me when it's so tempting.
Absolutely.
I'm so good at it too. You should see my collection. Yeah. But I feel like there's a real danger in that. And with all these people that I work with, I often work with teachers or singers or whoever, non-professional musicians, who will say, when I was a kid, the music teacher said something to me and I've never recovered.
What's the most prevalent polished rock that you have?
Oh God, I've got so many.
First one that comes to mind.
Okay, the first one comes to mind is my doing grade 5 piano and sight reading, which I still am shocking at. And my piano teacher just saying, all you got to do is keep going through it. Just keep going through it. So I was murdering whatever the piece they'd given me to play. Getting worse and worse. Like, I think I got the first bar and that was great. Then I had to get through the other 31. And it was just, it was shocking. And it was, and I just thought, just keep going, keep going. And I was kind of, hunched up in the examiner sitting behind me, and then I suddenly heard him go, and I was like, whatever, 13, 12, I don't know. this grown man laughing at this thing. And I mean, it was amazing because it was so outrageous. It was so outlandish that I remember turning around and us both laughing. Because I don't know what he was laughing. I was laughing at the fact that as a 13-year-old kid, a grown man's going to laugh when you're doing your best. That's an amazing one. But again, I don't know. They seem, and I think they always have seemed funny, these kind of mad moments. They're not the reason I don't want to sight read. They're not the reason I can't play the piano. They're not the reasons. I put them in a different bag. And that bag is simply that says, these are really your question, this is a pretty outrageous thing that's happened to me.
Sure.
And it's such a nice, for me, it's a better box than saying, this is why I can't do ...
When did you put them in the bag?
I think pretty quick. I think again, with these two sisters who used to constantly take the piss out, laugh at me, they'd given me a lot of things to put in the bag of the outrageous things that have happened. And I don't know, I mean, I think it is testament to my parents as well, who I think brought me up in such a way. And again, all those family dynamics, I'm the youngest and being very much, I just felt incredibly loved and I felt incredibly secure within that, and I think that allowed me to be able to put in that box that says this is simply the most outrageous things that have happened to me.
I mean, that
sounds conceited.
No, that feels like a sort of method of keeping calm and putting it to one side. Do you have a technique for keeping calm?
Well, I think partly there's a practicality. So that teacher, again, in America, we were all students, we were reading a book by Kenny Werner, and it was like sort of this Zen Buddhist approach to improvisation. This thing about walking this tightrope without really a safety net, with an audience, everything that is terrifying. And we were all trying to read it, and it was all sort of being in the moment. And I'd said to him during one piano lesson, should I read this book? Because all my mates are reading it. And him saying, I don't know, why don't you go and pick some flowers and then come back and let's just carry on playing the piano. and it was nice because he was this, I love the practicality of it. That he had this sort of thing where he was, that he wasn't kind of macho, but he had a practicality which again was really useful to me. And I'd come back to music college and I'd see these people who had clearly been picking their fair share of flowers, spending ages getting the right approach. And I never understood why this arm would waggle, what it gave to them. And me just thinking, I just want to do my job. There's a practicality here that I need to just do my job.
Right.
And I always have that when I'm performing, when I'm presenting, whatever I'm doing. There's this thing that clicks in that says you can back into the spotlight and be like, turn away from it. You're kind of backing into it because you're putting yourself into that position. Or you can just walk into it and just have a few moments before the light hits you that says, do your job. And then you just do it. And it's like getting into a cold swimming pool. Once you're in it, you're in it. And I think that is my real technique of dealing with that.
Amazing. That sounds effective. And when did you figured that out from your time with him?
Yeah, and I think that moment of him saying, sort of pricking the pomposity of being a bit too precious, that's a lot of P's, for in music. I think that in any art, I think you have to be so careful of that. And piano is such an odd one because it is, it's not a voice, it's not coming through you. It's not as of course it's personal, but it's not like, I don't know, when I hear the vibrato and just think, it's such a personal thing, vibrato, whether that's from your body or whether that's how you approach a string instrument or whatever. The piano doesn't have that. It's a machine. It's a machine that you are operating. I know that you're doing that with the violin and voice and all of those things, but there's something really technical. I don't know whether this makes sense, but there's expression, but it feels, when I play the piano, I have those moments when I'm sort of, when I'm really there and it disappears, and the instrument disappears and I'm in ecstasy, I'm flying out of it. And that's an amazing moment to happen when you're performing, but a lot of it, I'm looking at an iron frame. I'm looking at something made of wood and iron that I'm just trying to tune like you would a train. It's like, do you know what I mean? It's like a steam engine. It's a piece of mechanical equipment, and your job as the person performing on it is to be able to turn that into art. And I think again, that also helps that balance between the practicality of it and the sort of artistry of it.
Would you prefer to be a psychoanalyst or a doctor?
Wow. God, that's a really interesting one. Okay, do you mean practically? Like, I suppose the thing about, the practicality, my father was a doctor, so I would see him very much, I would see that what dealing with death, I think, does to somebody. And I think he was a brilliant doctor. I hear so many stories about him being a brilliant doctor, and probably using both those techniques. As a guy in a local pub came up to me and brought me a drink right after my father died and said, he said he was an amazing doctor. And I didn't know this guy. And he said, when I was a kid, I went in there and I had to have an inoculation. I had to have whatever my shot was. And I was so nervous about it. And I walked in and I was crying. And I remember your dad sort of, I was sitting on his couch thing, whatever. And your dad was kind of rolled up my sleeve and he was saying, what's the problem? Why are you crying? And while he was doing this, he was kind of swabbing, preparing the area. And he was saying, I just don't want to have this thing. And I'm scared. And you said your father was just kind of, swabbed it all, getting it all ready, getting the injection ready and saying, what? But I don't understand. What's what's the big deal? It's just an injection, sort of. And the boy saying, because it's going to really hurt, Dad. Sort of, meanwhile, injecting the stuff in him. But I don't think it is going to hurt. It kind of clears up the thing. I think it's like these things, it's more like a scratch. It's not kind of puts the plaster on. The boy's saying, I know, but I don't want to pop. I think it's going to pop me. And he says, it's just a scratch. You never need to really worry about that stuff. And the boy's saying, I just don't want it today. And then my father had said, okay, look, the sun is shining. Why don't you go out and play? You come back to me next time when you feel ready and we'll do it then. And the boy's saying, okay, that's a good idea. And sort of walked out with this already in his arm. And I think those things, that was a fascinating idea of medicine. And I'd love to do that. And my father loved the science and the people. So I think he loved that approach, which was, that it had all those elements of sort of investigating the mind as well as the body. I think that the toll it can take is that you're dealing with death every day. Sometimes it's your fault, sometimes it's not, but you're dealing with it. And I think that can be quite taxing. And I guess also did you say psychologist or psychoanalyst?
Psychoanalyst.
That you're also dealing with, they're all big things to unpack. And gosh, that's a long answer to a short question again, but I think I would do better, possibly, or enjoy more psychoanalyst.
Right.
Simply because you've got more chance of being able to battle, possibly, the demons than you have a really vicious cancer.
Sure.
And I think I'd find that easier. I wouldn't be so worn. I feel like it would give me more room for hope.
I'm no psychoanalyst, but I have experience of being a patient of one, and probably the most extreme, patient will potentially contemplate suicide.
Yeah.
And so dealing with that as a psychoanalyst versus dealing with perhaps the inevitable death of cancer.
Yeah.
So it's really curious. Both have that extreme, you're going to have to deal with that.
Yeah.
And that's your job.
Yeah. And the thing about suicide, Martin Amis wrote in his autobiography, and he talks about suicide and says it's what happens when you can't bear life. And if life could be, and it's not a choice, because if life could be born, you would bear it. Right? So it's just like, it's something when you can't, it's unbearable. So it's funny, that thing, because the thing I'm talking about with the capacity of hope is that you'd hope that you'd be able to talk somebody down from a ledge.
Sure.
You'd hope you'd be able to bring them back from the precipice, which you can't negotiate when you've got a really vicious cancer. But if I go with Martin Amis's idea, which is that it's when life, it's not a choice. It's your only action. I don't know. Yeah, maybe I'm wrong to think about it having the hope to do that. I just feel like you've got a bit more negotiating space, because at least you can open a dialogue. And if that person that you're speaking to, and what do I know? I know nothing about this, but I feel like you can't negotiate with cancer.
So is it that it would be more difficult for you to solve?
Yeah. There's just less you can do. And I just think as a psychoanalyst, I just wonder whether there's always the potential that the next day the sun could shine. You could suddenly feel it. That person, your patient, might suddenly get it on their back again. Yeah.
What music has influenced your attitude to life?
Well, okay. So I would say there are two examples I always think about with these ideas, which is Robert Browning, a Victorian poet, said that a person's reach should always extend. A person's grasp must be always beyond their reach. Otherwise, what is a heaven for?
Sure.
The idea that always go for something, don't go for what's in your reach. Stretch, see if you can go for it. Risk it. And And there's a real beautiful humanity in that. And the two pieces I always think that really show that are Miles Davis's album, from the Prestige album. There's a song called It Never Entered My Mind. And there's this bit where he does this octave leap. And he splits the note as he's doing it. Da, 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 da. And it kills me. And maybe he did it on purpose to really kill me. Or maybe he just missed it. But there's something in that I think is the sound of the most beautiful part of humanity, which is that thing that is just wanting to be beyond where you are, which is what gets us to the moon, which is what gets us to be able to all these extraordinary inventions, is this thing of saying, you've pretty much got some things that float on the sea, that's pretty good. But what if we could ever get into the air and think, amazing, we can fly. Look at this patchwork we're flying over. What if we could get higher than that? And we're always, I just think that is so exquisitely human. And it doesn't matter whether you fail. Again, it's back to that thing about the taking away the mistakes, that not who cares. You go for it. That's the beauty. And I think that, and then there's another William Walton piece called Touch Her Soft Lips and Part, which was the soundtrack to Henry V, the old Laurence Olivier. And he does the same thing of the big jump. That's an orchestra who don't go for the split, but it's still the leap. It's still the leap of faith. And that, I'm not particularly tied to a fixed religion, but I think the leap of faith in any religion is utterly beautiful.
What have you got just beyond your reach at the moment?
Tomorrow. I think what is is everything, it's I never feel depressed by things being beyond my reach. Like I always feel like I always have hope. I always feel like I'll get there. And whether that is tomorrow, whether that's whatever. And I guess that's, again, it's all this thing. I don't feel like I necessarily need hope. I never feel myself in that kind of needing it, but I appreciate it while it's there. And I've landed this job, which is provides me with that thing that I'm always aiming for, the thing that's just out of my reach. Whatever I'm working on, whether it's working with an orchestra, and then I get to sit down and think, how do I get, what happens, what's the colour that if you blend clarinets and bassoons, how do I do it in unison, or do I do something? And the joy of putting that on paper and then having that realised by an orchestra. I'm smug. But it's just like, boy, I couldn't believe I would get this job that allows that stuff to happen, which, I'm always slightly nervous about it because, you have so many things that don't quite go to plan.
And the stuff that's just out of reach, that's what drives you.
Yeah. And so far in life, I feel like I'll get there. And I guess, I don't know, maybe later in life, you have those moments where you suddenly think, I don't think I'm going to get there. And even if I do, what's the point? And that must be really hard. There's a book that the opening line is a woman says, I've been thinking about all my past lovers and whether they saw me as a hill whose view didn't warrant the ascent. That's big, right? Whose view didn't warrant the ascent. That's harsh for her to think of herself like that. But and maybe that is when life becomes really tricky, is then you suddenly think, even if I get there, I don't think it's worth it. Oh boy. But at the moment, I feel absolutely it's going to be worth it.
Do you wish to leave something behind?
I don't know. I think I don't put that burden of pressure on myself. And because again, I don't want to end game. I don't want to be thinking about legacies, my legacies. I don't want to live my life. Actually, I don't know. I do want to, oh God. Okay. The thing about leaving something behind is that I think there is that part of you want to come into the world, I think, and try and change it, make it better, improve people's lives. I do. I'm also aware that you go to a funeral, and a lot of funerals, the body's in the ground, and then you come out and you eat cucumber sandwiches, and then you go home and you talk about them for 2 or 3 days, and then the next day you talk about Strictly or Bake Off. And that happens to a lot of people. And that doesn't mean that you live your life without thinking that you don't worry that they'll talk about you for 3 days after you die. But I don't want to live my life constantly thinking about what's going to happen after I've gone.
Sure.
Right?
Yeah.
And I guess the hope is you make something, you do have some kind of ripple. We want to have those stories that somebody says, like that piano teacher who in America who is informed so much. It would be lovely if somebody feels that has happened. Only not for vanity, not for this kind of thing of just but absolutely just because, these gifts, humanity, I think, is continuing to give gifts on. We share all of these things. That's what makes us, I think, is what makes us human. I don't think that answers your question.
What do you know about your ancestors beyond your great-grandparents?
On my father's side from South Africa, I know somebody who goes back to somebody called Daniel Letanka, who was one of the founder members of the ANC. So he was a journalist and ran a newspaper, and quite interestingly, he'd been the ANC came over to England in, I think, 1922 or something to talk to the king about land reform in South Africa. So he was absolutely trying to bring about fairness. He's just trying to bring about fairness. And then for him in 1994, long after he died, for that group that he put together, the ANC, brought about democracy in South Africa, is pretty amazing. That's something I'm incredibly proud of. On my mother's English side, I don't know that far back. I mean, it's all sort of documented about my great-grandparents who did, I think one of them beat Gladstone in the House of Lords in some election, all of that stuff, but I don't know so much about them. Going that far. I think actually there was a guy, so my mother's family, as I said, were titled. And I think one of the reasons they did that they received the title because they really put in something about, they were ironworks up in Bradford, and they did something with the workers, and I'm not sure quite what the law that they changed, but they really looked after their workers and put protection, they kind of put protection of the workers in the sort of law. So I think they did really good things, and again is why they got this title.
Great-grandparents, that's beyond great-grandparents, that's quite a long way away.
Yeah.
That's left a mark on you.
Yeah.
So many years later, talking about legacy.
Yeah.
So you leave stuff behind.
Yes. Yeah. And I just wonder whether the things you leave behind, whether you leave the ones that last longest are the things you didn't expect to leave behind. And I guess that's that thing, is that for that ancestor in South Africa to start the ANC, I doubt he died thinking, one day this will lead to 1994 elections. Any more than I doubt that ancestor who was doing something with the bullet works and thought it was the ironworks and making bullets and stuff was that thing of protecting the workers would lead to a title that would still carry on down that family. I'm sure that they just lived their lives, and I hope they just lived their lives, and these things were suddenly recognised and valued. Do you see what I mean? And I guess that's the thing I guess that's what I'm trying to say about that thing about being conscious about a legacy, is I think it probably gets in the way of what you're trying to do.
And so, in what ways are you happy to be good enough?
Well, that's an interesting one, because I really remember being with my really dear friend in London in 15, 20 years ago, and we'd both just released albums 15 years ago, and we were in Tower Records, when that existed, in Piccadilly Circus. And I remember going to Tower Records 10 years before, going to the jazz sections and just buying as many CDs as I could on these things. And then we walked around and I said, look at this. And there I went through the L section, look, there's my album. And then we were kind of goofing around and I was kind of showing it to everyone, look, just being idiots. And her saying to me, and she had the same thing, there was her one. And she said to me, the thing is, like, this is nothing, right? It's just one album. We're not on the shelf. We should be on that table where they put out all the best albums. We're not there. And I remember saying to her, but let's not endgame this so much that we're only going to be content until we're on that shelf there, because it's pretty bloody amazing to have wandered these aisles as a kid, to suddenly see my name amongst my heroes is a big deal. And that felt good enough. And that doesn't mean I feel like, so I don't need to try and get onto that table. But I'm also so aware of, God, I sound smug and conceited. But it's not that. It is just that thing of, I feel a real purpose. And I feel, as I say, I'm moving towards that stuff. My grasp is beyond my reach, but I'm getting there. I'm working every day to get there. And I feel really content in that. And I feel like it's good enough.
And there's a balance.
I know, because what you don't want to do is sit back on your laurels and think good enough is your peak. You're halfway up the view and up the mountain. You're halfway up your ascent, and to think that view warrants that when there's the top. I'm still hungry for the top.
Did you have, and do you still have that infinite goal? Infinite goal.
Yeah, and it's not a single thing, and it is just beyond my reach, which is what gets me up, which is what makes me so excited every day to think, what does the day bring? What work am I going to do? What possible things might come up? It doesn't, and again, the failure, I don't care about the failure. I think the journey is so fascinating to me. I did all this stuff years ago, we were going to be on TV, and we had all these meetings with the ITV studios, and they would take us, wine and dine us at whatever those fancy restaurants are called, the Ivy. It's just amazing. I mean, hilarious to see. I never thought I'd be sitting in the Ivy, being wine and dined by the ITV studio execs. And it didn't come off. But I never felt, I've wasted all this time, this is never going to... I never felt that. I genuinely was like, that was extraordinary to have done that. It was in that box that said extraordinary things that have happened to me. Sometimes it's bad, sometimes it's amazing. But it's never this box that says, and this is why I can't.
Attitude.
It's just attitude. Yeah. And again, I might sound completely naive, but I feel like that is why that idea about being a psychoanalyst, you've got more potential to change, because I don't know what I'm talking about, but I just wonder, with so many things, maybe not as deep or as big or as traumatic as the potential of suicide, but I think there are so many things that, attitude can really change people's lives. And you can't get an attitude to a cancer that says, I'm going to really think. You can't. I don't think it works like that to a degree. I mean, we don't know much about all that stuff yet. But I just think the potential of attitude is extraordinarily powerful.
Because it determines your actions.
Absolutely. And it's funny because, I sit here myself and I suddenly feel like, God, I sound like a Hallmark card. Life isn't getting what you want, it's wanting what you get, or is that the right way around? And it seems simplistic, and it sounds naive, and it can be, but I don't think it is. I really do. That's my feeling. Like my sisters are going to be laughing at me. The fact of the matter is, I believe all this. I genuinely believe it.
You mentioned extraordinary things that have happened to you. Do you believe you live an ordinary or an extraordinary life?
I think I lead an extraordinary life, and I think so many of us do. I think just to be alive is pretty extraordinary. You know, all those things that just the fact of being, it's such a miracle life, that the fact that the conception can take place, that all those things that can go wrong, and the fact that it goes right. You know, people who lose children, we lost a child, we had a pretty awful time with all of that. And it made me again realize, wow, life is so precious. You know, that it's when it happens, you've already won it. You're already extraordinary just by being here. And I think all those things that come out after it, again, this thing of, you know, my father used to drive me on those drives. He'd say to me, "It's amazing. Like, here we are in this car. It's not like a carriage. You don't feel the wind in your face." If somebody had said to you 100 years ago, one day you'd be able to drive beyond whatever the speed of a horse, beyond 20, 30 miles an hour. You go 70 miles an hour. You wouldn't even feel the wind. You can go, but also you can turn something and you can have an orchestra play to you. You can hear, it's not like 40 musicians, but it'll play it all around you, and you're moving through space at 70 miles an hour with an orchestra playing, and you don't even feel it. I mean, that's extraordinary.
Are you excited about future technology?
I'm massively excited because I'm fascinated to see where we're going to go.
Anything in particular?
Flying cars. And, I mean, you know, that I'm obsessed with all that stuff. Again, that's my late night Googling. I've been looking 2021's best hover cars.
The thing is, we laugh. And you would have been laughed at in the example you just gave.
Right. And I mean, again, it's so exciting. It's so exciting to be alive. It's so exciting to, just to have all these things coming your way. It's bloody cool.
We've talked previously on, I've got this sort of idea that I sort of stick with, the idea that convenience kills.
Yeah.
So what do you think we lose with this exponential technology and the convenience that it brings us?
It's interesting. So I'm working on a project right now with WWF, not the wrestlers, sadly, but the wildlife fund. And we're talking about the rainforest. And we've been talking about that phrase, convenience kills, keeps coming up in the conversations that I'm having with the people I'm working with. I really, it keeps coming up, and what we're creating with the rainforest for that convenience is exponential loss. And I kind of, you know, we talk all about the dangers of exponential growth, but exponential loss is terrifying in that, you know, you chop down great swathes of the rainforest, you affect climate change, brings the amount of water in the atmosphere is reduced, or the amount of rainfall is reduced. Then you have these fires that burn, natural, man-made, and they burn more swathes of it. But because there's no water and rain, they could burn for longer. And then they burn for longer, and so you lose more bits, and then you're chopping. And this sort of downward spiral is terrifying, of exponential loss. And I think if we were able to reframe the way we look at all of these things and the danger of convenience killing, and for that to be front and center of government decisions across the world, I think, that's our next challenge. And again, that little these drip feeding. What I'm trying to do with that music is, with my music, is trying to spark all of these conversations. You know, because suddenly you could be ambushed. It could just be that one kid who's thought suddenly realized by putting their hand up and saying, "I want to play this. Does this thing work on a xylophone?" And that thing suddenly being presented, or a prisoner having that, whatever those moments of transformation are, if that's the person that somehow was in the right place at the right time, that suddenly you have this kind of amazing, that might challenge the status quo, that might change all of these things.
To change attitudes.
And change attitudes. And again, as we're saying, attitudes are so key. If you challenge those attitudes, the potential is enormous.
Speaking of potential, who or what might have stopped you from becoming your full potential?
The thing is, I feel like I'm tenacious, and I feel like I'm rubbish at taking no for an answer. And I think whatever they say, you build me a 20-foot wall and I'll make you a 20-foot ladder. I feel like I will always find my way around it. That struggle that I had with playing the piano, my piano teacher was great. She always used to say, you can't have your cake and eat it. Being that you can't be a jazz pianist without learning scales, arpeggios, harmony, how it all fits together and how you work this machine of a piano. And my retort, wasn't a retort, my further question was just to say, why not? I want it. Want to have my cake and eat it. And that, again, that attitude, which is always saying, I'm not going to buy your negativity. You leave it on the table. You can put it there, but it doesn't resonate with me. It's boring to me. Why would I put that in my pocket? And I think I've always had that attitude that says, maybe all you're telling me is that you can't do that. That doesn't mean I can't do it. I reckon I can build a bigger ladder than this. I think that I even if things have been put in my play to barriers or boundaries, I would always be finding ways to negotiate that.
Pete Letanka, thank you so much for coming on the program. It's been absolutely wonderful to have such a great chat.
Thank you very much.
If you enjoyed this exploration into Pete's unlived life, make sure to give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to the YouTube channel for a new episode every Wednesday. Have you considered any of these questions yourself? Let me know in the comments section. I hope you enjoyed watching.